First, a word about my half beard. I went on a month-long hike on the Israel Trail. I decided not to shave. That's half of the story. And then I was burned many years ago. I don't have hair on the right side of my face, so that's the other half. I'm not trying to make a fashion statement. Okay, so I want to talk about trust. I want to talk about the importance of trust to society. Why is it so important, and how do we get more of it? Now, if you think historically, we had lots of ways to increase trust in society. We had things like a handshake. A handshake is actually showing somebody you don't have a weapon, right? If you come to somebody and your hand is out there in the open, they know you don't have a weapon. Also, clinging glasses, saying l'chaim, is also a question of trust. The story is that people used to mix the liquid between the two glasses. Maybe you're trying to poison me. Let's make sure that the liquid is spread between the two glasses. This way I'll know there's no trust. Now, that's not real trust, by the way, but still, trust. Now, trust, I will try to argue, is a common good. It's everywhere, and it's incredible lubricant for society. So let's think for a second about what happens when we don't have trust. So I was recently in a country in South America, and I went to buy a pen. And I went to the counter, I saw a pen I liked, I pointed to it. The person wrote me a little note. I took that note and I went to a cashier. I paid the cashier that amount of money, and I got another note. I went to a third person. I gave him the second note, and he gave me the pen. Now, why do they need 3 people to sell a $15 pen? Because they don't trust anybody, right? The person who ran the store did not want anybody to hold the pen and the money at the same time, so they created this incredibly elaborate process because there was no trust. And if you think about your own lives, think about the role trust plays. What happened in society without trust? You have to have a contract for everything. Everything is complex. You don't trust anybody. Everything is incredibly difficult. By the way, one of the most bizarre things about trust, have it ever happened to you that you're in the airport and you need to go to the bathroom and you say to somebody, would you watch my bag? I'm going to this. We studied that actually. So first of all, it's amazing if you think about it, because what you're really telling that person is, if you're thinking about stealing my bag, now is the right time. But we actually asked the question, and it turns out that the person who said, yes, I'll watch your bag, actually feels committed to their promise, right? It's just an empty promise to somebody you'll never meet again, but people still stick to it. So try it out. Okay, so trust is incredibly important. Now, to think about trust, I want to tell you about a game we call the public goods game, the public goods game. And here's how the game works. I'll give you one version of it, okay? In this version, we have 10 people. 10 people. Every morning that they wake up, they get $10 each. Every morning they wake up, they get $10, and they can decide what to do with that money. They can put as much of it as they want in the public pool, and they can keep as much as they want to themselves. By the way, this is an anonymous game. Nobody sees anybody else. People just put money into the public pool. Now, the money in the public pool grows 5 times, and then in the evening, it's equally divided by everybody. Right? So what happens when you play this game? Life looks good. People wake up, they get $10. Everybody puts their money in. 10 people, $10, $100. By the evening, the money is multiplied 5 times. Everybody gets $50. Life is good. This is what it is to live in a good society. You're contributing something to the public good increases in value, everybody benefits. And people are happy. Okay. And then one day, this goes on for a while, and then one day, one person puts 0 in. You probably all can think who that person would be from the people you know. Okay, so what happens when one person puts nothing? 9 people, $90, multiply 5 times, 450. In the evening, everybody gets $45, right? So you notice, and one person has $55, right? The person who betrayed the public good has their $10, but because the money is equally divided, they get the $45 plus their own 10. That person betrayed the public good and benefited. But here's the question. What happens the next day? Nobody puts anything. Now, in economics, we think about this game as a game with two equilibria. Okay, what does it mean that it has two equilibria? There's one equilibria that everybody participates. And then there's another equilibria that nobody participates. The situation in which 50% of the people participate and 50 not is not a stable situation. So that's one. Everybody contributes or nobody contributes. These are the only two equilibria. But the other thing to realize is that the good equilibria, where everybody participates, is incredibly weak. It's enough for one person to betray the public good and the whole thing deteriorates. The solution in which nobody participates, it's incredibly strong equilibria. If two people all of a sudden start contributing, nothing changes. People don't move. And that's actually a good analogy for society in general. Trust is an incredibly important public good. When we live in a society that we can trust people, life is really wonderful. But when some people betray the public good, things deteriorate, and then it's very hard to change the situation. So the point is, the trust is a public good. We're all much, much better off when we have trust. The problem is that trust can deteriorate over time. Just imagine that you lived in a country where some of your public officials behave in a less than perfect way, right? What happens to the public trust? Or just imagine that you go somewhere and somebody says, do you want to pay VAT, ma'am, or not, right? What happens to our understanding of what's acceptable in society? Okay, so now that we know that trust is important, it's a public good, we can ask the question of how do we increase trust? What can we do to increase trust? And here's a couple of ways to think about it. The first game I'll describe to you is a game I'm sure you all know called the Prisoner's Dilemma game. And just to repeat, here's the game. The police catches you and one of your best friends. They catch you, they suspect that you've been a part of a criminal activity, and they put you each in two separate rooms, and they start interrogating you. And basically, your question is, in this case, do you cooperate? In this case, it means you're silent. You cooperate with your friend, not with the police. Or do you defect? Do you rat on your friend and give them up? Right? That's your dilemma. Stay loyal to your friend, give them up. And there's a payoff matrix, and we'll go at it. If both people are silent, right, then each of you will get 1 year in prison. You don't say anything, the other person don't say anything, the police has very weak evidence, you'll be a year in prison. But imagine you're the red person and you ask yourself, what will the other person do? You ask yourself, what will the blue person do? And you say, well, right now, if I remain silent and the blue person is silent, we each get 1 year. But the blue person could benefit if they decide to rat. And then I will get 20 years. So what should I do? I should rat as well. So basically you have a dilemma. If you trust the other person, you would both remain silent and both of you would benefit. Justice, of course, will not benefit, but you two would benefit. But the problem is if you don't trust the other person, then you would both rat and everything would be worse for the two of you. Now, you sit there and you make a decision and you can't talk to your friend. Now, here is the particular game I want to describe to you. In this game, some people played in what is called the stranger condition. They played with one person, then another one, then another one, then another. Every game was a new game, as if you met a new person every time. And in the second condition, you played with one person 10 straight games. Now, if you play 10 straight games, you have a chance to do what? To build reputation. The other person sees you, they know how to react, and next time you have an opportunity to create reputation. What happens? Well, when you look at what happened in terms of what people chose, in the stranger condition, most people rat. What do you think happened in the game where people have a chance to create reputation? Most people cooperated. Most people trusted their friend. And it's actually slightly more interesting than that, because if you look at what happened over time, it looks as if there are two periods. In the first period, the people in the partner game were much better than the stranger because they were still building reputation and there was an opportunity to enjoy the reputation. But if you look at the end of the game, there's no more value for reputation. The game is ending, and therefore people defected. So if you only look at the first part of the game, where there was real value for reputation, people behaved much nicer. So what is the lesson here? The lesson is that when we think long-term, when we have some value from long-term social interaction, we behave much better, right? Of course, you can think about something like eBay. What is eBay doing with its reputational system? It's taking people who are interacting with each other in the stranger condition and say, let's create a reputation system that will basically put all of those together as if there's some residue to your interaction between one person to another. Okay, so long-term relationship and reputation help to increase trust. There's another way to increase trust, and that I'll describe with something called the trust game. And here's how the trust game works. Two people, player one, player two, both of them in separate rooms. They don't know each other. They'll never meet each other. And you come to player one and you say, hey, player one, here's $100. And now you could do two things with this $100. You could decide to give it to the blue player. And if you give it to the blue player, the money will quadruple. It will come from $100, it will become $400. Or you can keep the money to yourself. Now ask yourself, what should I do? How much should you send? Should you send anything? Should you send nothing? What should you do? Well, in this game, what you should do is put yourself in the shoes of the other person, and you ask yourself, if I would send them the money, will they send it back? And if you think the other person will send you back the money, of course you'll send it. And if you think they'll take the money and go home, you'll not send them the money, right? Now, just to be clear, the economic prediction, the standard rational economic prediction is that the other person would never send you money back. Why would they? They would be better off to just take the money and go home. And if you believe in perfect rationality, you would think they will take the money and go home, so let me not trust them in the beginning. So what happens? What actually happens is that people do send the money and people do reciprocate. Okay? So good news, we are better than economic theory predicts. We are more trusting and more reciprocating. As a side comment, I should say that we often use the term irrational in a negative sense, that people are bad in some way. And it's true in many cases, but in this particular case, in the case in which we're more trusting and more reciprocating the standard economic theory predicts, it's actually a good thing, right? You would not want to eliminate. Like if you could redesign human beings, you would not eliminate trust and reciprocation. You might actually want to increase it. Okay, so people are trusting, people are reciprocating. Good news, but not always. Not always. Sometimes the red player sends the money and the blue player goes home. And here's how things become slightly more interesting. This is where punishment and revenge come in. So imagine that you're the red player and you send your $100 to the blue player and the money quadrupled, and then the blue player took all the money and went home. And then I came to you and I say, listen, you just trusted that person, you send them $100, they decide to take the money and go home, but I'll tell you what, if you will give me, Dan, money, I will go and I will hunt the blue player for you, and I will take some of their money. If you'll give me $1, I'll hunt them down and take $2 away from them. You'll give me 50, I'll hunt them for 100. Now, just to be clear, you're not making any money out of this deal. You just lost $100. Now you can lose more, but with the benefit of getting the other person to lose even more. Now, how many of you would go ahead and spend that money? Put yourself in that mindset. You just spend $100. That person got $400. They went home. I give you this offer to go into your checking account, spend more money to make that other person suffer. How many of you would take revenge? Okay, about a third, a little bit more. How many of you ever got divorced? Now you can get the feeling, right, of what people... because because the truth is that it's very hard to sit here and feel how offended we would be when somebody betrayed our trust. But when somebody betrays our trust, we would go to unbelievable extents to get them to suffer. Now the thing is that revenge has kind of a social logic to it. And here is how the logic works. So imagine that you and I were on a desert island, and I had the mango, and you wanted my mango. If you thought I was perfectly rational, you would say, let me steal Dan's mango. I'll run away. He would not find me. He would go and get a new mango. But if you thought that I was revengeful, that I would not sleep and I will not rest, I will not eat, I will not drink until I find you, my mango, and maybe take a banana from you, you would not take my mango to start with. Now, if you think about it in that regard, imagine one of you would act negatively towards somebody else in the audience, but you knew that if you do it, everybody will be offended by that and everybody will jump on you. That, in a way, is a version of the police and the justice system that is coded as part of our moral code, right? The outrage that we feel and our willingness to take revenge is actually an old version of the police and the judicial system at once. We would punish somebody for offending us. So what happened? Yes. Do people take revenge? Absolutely. And even more interestingly, when people execute and plan revenge, their brain shows similar activity to pleasure. Now, I'm not recommending it, but just so you know, there is something like pleasure. Okay. And finally, I would also say something about revenge. In some sense, if you think about revenge in this game, it's altruism. Why? Altruism is something that we do selfishly. In this case, you would teach this bastard a lesson. Like, you would never get to benefit from that again. You'll never meet them. You don't know who they are. But you will go into your checking account. You would spend money to teach that person a lesson so they interact better with other people down the line. So how can we increase trust? Long-term relationship, reputation, and even revenge. I'll end with 2 more tricks for trust. Economists, by the way, are always puzzled by why people leave tips, especially in restaurants in cities that people don't intend to go. Why would you ever leave a tip? But we do. And we leave tips in very similar magnitude to restaurants we intend to go back to. But in this particular study, imagine a waiter comes to you. There are 4 people in the table. The waiter comes to the first person, and the first person says, I want the fish. And the person says, no, don't take the fish. It's too expensive and not so good. Take the chicken. And then what happens to the waiter's recommendation to everybody else? They accept all the recommendations. Why? Because the waiter showed that they're willing to sacrifice their personal utility. I told you to take something cheaper, demonstrating that we have aligned interest, right? Now, what would happen if the waiter, somebody says, I want the fish, and the waiter came and said, don't take the fish, take the lobster. It's twice as much, and it's a little bit better. How much would everybody else would trust him? Not that much. The point is that basically showing that we have the other person's interest in mind and we're willing to sacrifice some of our own utility for that is a trust-creating exercise. And then I'll tell you one last piece of personal advice on increasing trust. So I told you I went hiking on the Israel Trail. It was a great month. And during that month, I invited some people I knew and some people I didn't know to join me and Ron, my friend, for a day or 2 along the road. And we had 3 rules for the trail. No phones from 7 to 7. Everything that is said on the trail stays on the trail. Very important rule. And then everybody introduces themselves with an embarrassing story. And I learned that telling embarrassing stories is a wonderful way to create trust. So I'm going to recommend that you try it this evening. And to get you started, I'll tell you one of my embarrassing stories. By the way, I had the month, I it's amazing. You discover you have so many stories, like they just keep on coming. So this particular story, this was about 2 years after I got injured. And there was a woman in rehabilitation with me called Tzipi, and she decided that I needed to go on a date. And she said that she had a friend that might be willing to date me. Okay, great. So she took me to that date. We met, me, Tzipi, and her friend. We met somewhere on the beach to have ice cream. We get ice cream. We sit. It's around sunset. And this woman, for some reason, asked me a question about hospital. I mean, it's a good topic, but she asked me a question about something about hospital. I don't know exactly what she asked, but I went into a tirade about a nurse I hated. And this was a terrible nurse. He was just awful. I hated everything about it. I would try to organize my day to avoid his shift. I would try to get operate on Fridays if I knew that he was on shift on the week. I hated that. You can hear. I hated that person with passion. It was like my day was organized around escaping how evil he was. Anyway, I didn't talk about him for 2 years. And all of a sudden she asked me, this poor woman, she asked me something and I just go. I just go and go and go. And I keep on this hate and anger and terrible. And I keep on going, I think for 15 minutes. Just go and go and go and go. And I finish and I feel such relief. Like, I didn't talk to him for a long time. Finally, I get a chance. Just goes out. And she says, and what's his name? So I say his name, and she stands up. And she says, it's my father. And I've never seen her since. So I'm not recommending all embarrassing stories. But it's a trust-creating activity. Trust is important. Try tonight, and thank you very much.